there's a particular type of exhaustion that nobody talks about. It's the kind that you feel, you're fed up, and it arrives very quietly. You're perhaps watching the news, or you're scrolling through your feed, or you could be sitting in a meeting. And then someone brilliant, a celebrity or some other genius, someone very exceptional, someone in the world has decided that matters are worse than they really are. So here we are yet again. They're acting out and you feel exhausted or irritated. You've had enough. Perhaps they're acting out in public again, making harsh, horrible statements. Maybe it's someone at home who is normally pretty even keeled, but every once in a while they go off the deep end. And somewhere in the background, quietly, there's a voice asking, what is wrong with me? Because I don't care. Go over there and act out. Move over there and do what you do. Psychologists have a name for this. So Christina Malish, a psychologist, looked at burnout, emotional depletion, and she identified compassion fatigue as the sustained exposure to other people's emotional distress. You're trying to stay present, but you're not infinite. You deplete as well. It's distance. It's that flat, tired feeling. It's fatigue as the cost of exposure. And you want to remain a caring person. You want to remain engaged. You're not without flaws, But what's happening here is you have become a witness. And witnessing depletes you. It drains the life out of you if you're exposed to it for too long. And that's why when people offload on their friends all the time, and all of a sudden their friends ghost them, and they say, well, that person's not being kind, there's a reason for that. You've depleted them. Through no fault of your own, you expect good friends to be there for you, to listen to you, to hear all of your troubles, to offer advice. You expect in friendship, some of you, the mother, the father, the sister, the brother, the auntie, the school teacher, the therapist, you expect a lot from your friends. And everyone has a limit. When you're exhausted like that, you've been depleted. Someone has literally drained the life out of you. Many of you may recall feeling that way after you've left a friendship, a meeting with someone, or maybe in the boardroom, at work. Maybe you leave a meeting just feeling exhausted because someone was clamoring for attention, looking at their clock because someone was speaking and they wanted to speak. It's one of those things where people are so unself-aware and they drain you. So you've been a witness, possibly for a very, very long time, especially in families. That relative, every time you see them, they've got some drama going on. And witnessing is work. Even when nobody acknowledges it as work, it is. So this is where we begin today. Hey there, lovely people. Thanks for watching from wherever you are today. Quick favor before we get going, tap that like button, say hi in the comments, and of course, subscribe with the little bell so you don't miss anything. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit auto download so every new episode finds its way to you straight away. Let's dive in. To understand why very exceptional people, people with talent, skill, even genius, often dismantle, come apart, overextend themselves, or act out in public, why exceptional people might dismantle the very structures that made them famous, or if it's a celebrity, or skilled or genius, we have to go back further than the music, further than the Oscar, further than the BAFTA, further than the Golden Globe, further than the boardroom, further than the first moment the behavior became impossible to ignore. And for that, yes, you've guessed it, we need to go back to childhood. I've spoken about this psychiatrist many times, John Bowlby, and he is a British psychiatrist whose attachment theory fundamentally changed the developmental psychology throughout time. So he proposed something that was very, I'm going to say simple, but obviously that's not a slight because we're still talking about it today. I say it's deceptively simple, that the earliest relationships that we form in life with teachers, caregivers, siblings, extended family, neighbors, all of those people, especially at school, especially teachers, because they become pseudo caregivers for many, many hours of the day throughout your formative years, with whoever was responsible for your safety, for your development. That creates what Bowlby calls an internal blueprint. I refer to blueprints quite a lot in my work because we all have had a foundation, something from which we were built. So a working model of how the world responds to us, basically, and whether you are worthy of consistent love. Now, remember that word because it's very important, consistent love. Whether closeness is safe, whether dependency leads to abandonment. So in my recent videos, I talked a bit about abandonment, especially in the Prince video. But these blueprints don't disappear. They just don't disappear when we become adults. They don't disappear in puberty. They don't disappear when we become famous. They don't disappear when we realize we are a genius because everybody said so. They don't disappear when we become indispensable. They go underground and they resurface often at the moment of your greatest success. So this is when the saying comes in that, money changes people. No, it doesn't, kind of thing. You are who you are. Money just enhances it. People have those sayings. Well, that really is true. You are who you are, but we do develop, we grow. But there is a blueprint. There's a foundation. But it doesn't disappear when we become who we are, famous or not. So often at that moment of greatness, when the stakes are highest and the exposure is most threatening, that's when people tend to act out. So you will see that a lot with people acting out. And I do understand that there's always an element to consider as far as mental health goes, but that's part and parcel of who you are as well. So we cannot separate that out. So you can't say, oh, well, that person has mental health problems. Well, many people have mental health problems and they don't act out. So Donald Winnicott, who I've spoken about, is a pediatrician and psychoanalyst. Donald talked a lot about early development and how the foundation is either the false self or the true self. I absolutely love this. I've just seen it so much in my work. The false self emerges as a protective structure. So you may create some kind of performance of compliance, of being capable, so capability, of whatever the environment requires, whatever is needed at work, whatever is needed in your band as a lead singer, whatever is needed as a lead actor or as an ensemble, whatever is needed as the acting coach. The true self, however, is the raw, undefended, so very raw, very open, core of who we actually are, who we really are. And that gets hidden. It gets protected for a reason. And I would say sometimes it can get buried quite deeply where you just wouldn't be aware of it, and nor would anyone else. In fact, it may not even surface unless you go to therapy. It will surface. Sometimes buried so deeply, even the person carrying it won't know. Or if they have been told, maybe they had therapy as a child. I've had clients who have been in therapy since they were a child. It could be that they have been told, they are aware, but they forget. So exceptional ability just complicates this in a profound way. It makes it even more complicated. So when you see these celebrities or politicians or whoever acting out on a global scale, it's because it's complicated, and that is a part of who they are. And I would say, let's talk about genius for a second. So a child's genius is recognized pretty early. These virtuosos, these, let's talk about, Beethoven, Mozart, a young Prince, a young Michael Jackson. These geniuses show talent very early on. It's almost always something very subtle and damaging sometimes has occurred. That's not to say that every genius has had something horrible happen to them, but we only need to look at history and find that geniuses have usually suffered in some way. We don't know how or why. I think it's the same as people saying, whether you believe in it or not, this is just an example, okay? Just an example. But a lot of people who have psychic abilities, or especially mediumship abilities, it has happened as a result of going through something very profoundly life-changing. But that's not always. But the genius becomes the relationship. So adults respond not to the child, but to the capability, to what they can do. They almost become defined by it, but it doesn't dictate how they're treated because everybody treats people differently. But love arrives conditional on performance. You're loved because you perform. These are the theater moms and dads, the stage parents who will reward when they get the part, not before. Not your wonderful child. When you get the part, you are a wonderful child. That attention follows achievement. And the child then learns at a cellular level that when they do something, what they do is more valued than who they are. And this is not a celebrity story. This is a human story. You may recognize it in your own workplace. So, for example, the colleague whose performance is extraordinary, but who visibly unravels the moment they're not the most capable person in the room. The leader whose confidence is ironclad in achievement and almost non-existent in vulnerability. So these are the hardcore, leaders who show no emotion. the team member who delivers brilliantly alone, and if they have to collaborate, they self-combust. So the wound precedes the workplace. It's in childhood. The workplace, however, simply provides the stage. And that's why I used celebrity as an example. All the world is a stage for everything that you are and everything that you do. It is a brave feat to become something like an actor or a musician with eyes on you on a global scale, because who you are will show up eventually. And sometimes it forces you, us, the viewer, the fan, just the normal person at home wanting to watch 15 minutes of the evening news, to be a witness when we haven't asked for it. And that's contributing to our fatigue. Now, this is where it becomes quite fascinating, to me anyway. Bowlby's student, Mary Ainsworth, I've mentioned her before in other videos, developed what became known as attachment styles through her strange situation experiments in the 1970s. Absolutely fascinating. What she observed in children who were separated briefly from their caregivers revealed something that extends far beyond their infancy. So the way we manage the tension between needing others and fearing that need, between dependency and autonomy, shapes every significant relationship we will ever have. Fascinating. And for high ability individuals, that tension is amplified. So genius, almost by definition, requires collaboration at some point. You know, the band, the co-founder, the producer, the team. Nobody builds something extraordinary entirely alone, even when the mythology insists otherwise. There's always a leader. And yet, the very relational wounds that often accompany this exceptional ability make collaboration feel threatening. So, to need the band is to be dependent on the band. To be dependent is to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable is to risk the abandonment, the conditional love, the withdrawal of attention that the nervous system learned to dread long before the first record deal or, signing or even the first board meeting. I would say the conflict that comes out of it, so the conflict that emerges is not really laziness or ingratitude or even ego, because, all those things would require you being conscious, though it can look like all three from the outside, but it's the nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. Protect the self, maintain control, resist dependency at all costs. I know there's a lot of talk about the nervous system at the moment. It seems to have exploded. But what I would say is the important thing to know about your nervous system is that it's automatic. It's central. So the CNS, it's central to your being and how you feel and the decisions you make. So it's all connected. And the most effective way to resist dependency on something that you've built together is to dismantle it before it can leave you. Sound familiar? Erik Erikson. So I first learned about Erik Erikson when I did my first hypnotherapy course. So his work on identity development across the lifespan remains essential reading. And it described the tension between industry and inferiority in childhood. The formative experience of discovering what you're capable of and what the capability costs you relationally, in terms of how you relate to other people. And that's where those negotiation skills come in at a very young age, doing something to get something, not just for the child, but for the adult as well. And most of it won't be conscious. It will be natural. It will be your nervous system seeking safety. When that tension goes unresolved, when it's just left there unresolved, it follows us. It will follow you around. It will follow you onto the stage, into the studio, into the boardroom, into the kitchen, into every room where our brilliance is both our greatest asset and our most exposed wound, vulnerability. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I created a toxic workplace kit for you to learn to regulate your nervous system in the evenings and at weekends if you're in that type of environment now. The great news is that I've upgraded it and I made it into an app. So it's free. The link is in the description. It's something you can use to pinpoint when you're feeling at your worst, and it shows you exactly what to do. And it takes 5 minutes. But what it will do as well, most importantly, is help you through the evenings so you're not vegging out and before you know it, it's 6 a.m. and you've got to go to work. And it will help you at weekends for the same reasons. You're not going out, you're isolating, you're not having fun. This will help you get back to who you are so that you feel refreshed, rejuvenated for the following work week. Link in the description, it's free. So in the workplace, this looks like the high performer who becomes very increasingly difficult to manage. This is the lead singer being late for every band practice, or the drummer turning up with a bad attitude and a bottle of gin in his pocket. These are people acting out when they feel most needed. So notice, I'll use bands again, just because they're an easy one to use. Notice that after that first huge, big success where they're everywhere, they've won all the awards, and I know people call it the second album curse, but there's something deeper psychologically going on there. This is where they usually implode. This is where somebody is either abusing substances or they've decided to leave. This will make or break. So when they're needed most, they become most disruptive. And when the system most wants to hold on to them, they almost aggressively resist being held. It's as if they don't trust it enough. We can't, yes, I know you're telling us we're great, and yes, I see these gold, platinum, but I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And that's just pushing it away. It reads as ingratitude, but it's neither. It's neither one. And despite how it can read, we need to name it as it really is. And it is someone whose nervous system associates indispensability with danger. Irving Goffman, who was a sociologist, his 1959 work, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, was extraordinary, but it transformed how we think about social identity. And it proposed that all human interaction is essentially performance. And as you get to watch these episodes, you will see sort of my own methodology in a lot of this. People I've read, people I admire and follow, and Goffman is one of them. So I always talk about performance. I talked about this in the Holmes video. So we manage what we would call impressions, what we impress upon people. We manage that, and we present versions of ourselves calibrated to the audience and the context, wherever we are and whoever we're with. For most people, this is largely unconscious. And, I talk about the unconscious all the time. It's a natural social fluency. It's how we would naturally behave and are, and the way we be with people. So for the exceptional individual, somebody like a genius whose identity became, I want to say, fused with their capability pretty early in life, because genius shows itself very early in life, the performance is existential. Because if the genius is the performance, if what I produce is who I am, then what happens when the performance is shared? When the band takes the stage and the audience cheers not just for me, but for us? What does that do to an individual? The identity fractures. And this is where we start to see the cracks, literally. So the identity fractures, not always dramatically at first, not always immediately, but the question begins very quietly but persistently to assert itself. It then becomes, where do I end? Where do I begin? Where do they end and where do I begin? And it can be quite literal. Will this band fall apart if I leave? Or will this corporation fall apart if I resign? So Heinz Kohut, whose self-psychology framework remains one of the most advanced and nuanced approaches to narcissistic development, described the concept of the grandiose self. So this is the part of us that requires mirroring, recognition, the confirmation that we are seen and we're valued as singular. It's all about me. This is not pathology in its early form. It's a developmental need. And every child requires mirroring to develop a stable sense of self. You must be mirrored in order to see yourself. And when that mirroring is, let's say, inconsistent, when it's based on conditions, when it's tied to something like performance, then the grandiose self doesn't integrate healthily. Because we're looking at health here. It doesn't integrate healthily into adult personality. Now, acting out as a child, give me that, that's mine, I want to be first, move away. As a child, it's explained away. As an adult, well, needless to say, it looks like someone being narcissistic. It remains, that part of you remains hungry, pretty much, vigilant, easily threatened by anyone or anything that I would say is perceived to dilute its singularity. So narcissists want to be the only one. They need to be singular as opposed to within a group. They must be seen separate as. And this feeds their grandiosity. The band that elevated you becomes the band that diminishes you. The co-founder who built it with you becomes the co-founder who owns half of what you made. The brilliant colleague whose ideas complement yours becomes the brilliant colleague whose ideas compete with yours. Now, you'll see this at work whereby someone who's not 100% capable will try and add to what you're doing, but because they're not fully capable, it's a waste of your time and energy. This is another energy drain. These are the people who are not skilled, not because they don't want to be, but because they're not there yet. Perhaps they're even doing a completely different job. So maybe the plumber is trying to tell you how to write code, and they know nothing about computers. Or the ward clerk in a hospital ward is trying to tell you how to take someone's blood pressure. This is I'm playing a video on this because it's a phenomenon that nobody talks about, or else I will get lost here. So let me stay on track. The system, the label, the company, the organization that once celebrated your uniqueness begins to feel like a cage. Does this remind you of anyone in your workplace? I would genuinely like to know. Tell me in the comments. And this isn't to diagnose, it's not to judge anyone, but because naming these patterns is how we begin to understand them, begin to dismantle them, and begin to help you feel better, stronger at work, understanding them is how we stop absorbing them unconsciously. So once you're aware, it becomes conscious and you can stop it. Because at the moment, many people are watching these things happen, play out online, on telly, or in the workplace, and they're exhausted by them, and they don't understand why. The colleague who comes into work every day, something's wrong with them. Every day there's another disaster. It's draining, and you've lost the will to care. And that's not your fault at all. So you mustn't feel bad about yourself. You're not an unkind, uncaring person. In fact, you're probably one of the most kind and the most caring, which is why this particular colleague always tends to come around you and tells you what's going on. You are still the kind, compassionate person that you've always been. Compassion fatigue is a very real thing, and you must learn to protect yourself. But I want to speak on a topic that's a little bit contentious because there's so much talk about it. A word about narcissism, because it's one of the most misused terms in popular psychology. It deserves careful handling here. Even some of the psychologists who are well known on YouTube conflate narcissism in relationships with overall narcissism, or even NPD with narcissistic traits. So narcissistic personality disorder, NPD for short, is indeed a clinical diagnosis. It has very specific diagnostic criteria. It takes a clinician to diagnose. I would be very skeptical with someone saying, oh, a social worker diagnosed that person with NPD. They wouldn't have done it on their own. A social worker, an OT, whoever it is, if they're not a medical doctor, yes, of course, they can contribute to symptoms. If they've witnessed something, they may have worked with the person for quite some time, they will have data, records, all of that. Yes, that's helpful, but they will not be diagnosing. They will not be making the final diagnosis. So that is not what we're exploring today at all. And I want to be clear about that distinction. I'm not here diagnosing anyone. What we are exploring here is something called narcissistic injury. And it's a concept that applies broadly to human experience. And it requires no diagnosis to be understood or to be recognized. So I just want that to be clear here. Cahute described narcissistic injury as the wound that occurs when the self, particularly the fragile, performance-dependent self that we've been talking about today, experiences a perceived threat to its coherence or to its value or to its singularity, being outstanding, different. The injury does not have to be objectively significant. It has to feel significant to the nervous system carrying that particular wound. A bandmate who receives more critical praise, a co-founder whose vision begins to diverge, a team member whose capability begins to overshadow, a manager who imposes structure on someone who's built their entire identity on the absence of it. These are not slights in the conventional sense. They are existential threats to a self that never learned to feel secure, to feel valued outside of singular recognition. And the response to narcissistic injury almost always involves control, taking control. And it's not because control is the goal as such, but because control is the nervous system's most valuable, most available tool for restoring a sense of safety when the self feels threatened. Now, in the studio, this looks like creative decisions becoming non-negotiable, collaboration becoming direction, direction becoming demand, the group mind slowly replaced by the single will. In the workplace, this looks like micromanagement. Someone taking over every aspect of your work, removing responsibility that gave you some autonomy. Credit claiming, so taking your work as if it were theirs. The gradual erosion of collective ownership until one person's fingerprints are on everything and everyone else's contributions. They've been quietly erased. And Kurt Lewin, whose foundational work on group dynamics, which I loved, many of you know, I was a group therapist for many years. So he, in the 1940s, he established a much needed at the time as well, but he established most of what we know about power in collective settings and groups. He observed that authoritarian leadership structures don't always arrive with big announcements, loudly. Sometimes they emerge incrementally. Each small consolidation of control, feeling reasonable in isolation, it may seem normal until the group looks up one day and discovers the democracy they thought they were a part of has quietly become something else entirely. And the exhausting thing, the thing that depletes the witnesses, us, people who have to stand around and watch it and witness it without our consent, pretty much, is that it rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly enough that each step feels survivable until it isn't. If what you just heard resonated, and if you want to go deeper into the forensic psychology, the hidden dynamics, and the real stories behind high-stakes groups and toxic workplaces, become a subscriber on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Subscribers get ad-free episodes, bonus deep dives that do not make it to YouTube, and extended analysis that goes further than the video format allows. This is where the conversation continues and where the real work gets done. Join the Inner Circle and subscribe today on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Now, this is the part of the story that almost never gets told. And I do love to bring in bits that are original. So we talk about the difficult genius. We analyze the behavior, we analyze the abuse of substances, the public collapses, the feuds, the crying on camera, the lawsuits, the divorces, the 2-day marriages. We place the instability inside the individual and we let it be there. That's it. We leave it exactly where it is. We rarely ask what the system was doing, what was happening. Now, this is the bit to get here. Every genius operates inside of a system. A band is a system. A company is a system. A family is a system. And systems, as family therapist Salvador Munichen, I always get it wrong, I think it's Minuchin, observed, have their own rules, their own homeostasis, their own ecostructure, their own investment in maintaining a particular balance of power. Even when the balance is destructive, the system that surrounds exceptional ability, the system that surrounds genius, almost always makes the same mistake in the exact same sequence. First, it rewards disruption. It thinks it's cute. Oh, isn't he so eccentric? Oh, isn't she so deep, so different? The unconventional thinking, the refusal to follow rules, which is antisocial, by the way, the behavior that would be unacceptable to anyone else, of anyone else. Anyone else would be in prison with that behavior. These get celebrated, or even worse, just ignored, because they're attached to something that is perceived as valuable. The genius gets away with things. The system accommodates. The system bends. People become enablers, especially if they have something financial that's at stake. If it depends on a roof over their head, they will lie in order to secure that and turn a blind eye to whatever is going on, be it destructiveness, maybe even abuse to others. Families have turned blind eyes to people who have been abusive. The parents know early on in a child by their behavior whether they're going to be compliant with societal norms or antisocial. And we're not talking about just bad kids throwing rocks at each other. We're talking horrible things that some children do. So that's always an indication early on. And who gets to see it? The parents, the teachers at school, the kids at school. Then the genius grows. So the person becomes exceptional. Genius cannot be overlooked then. The value increases. In adulthood, the person becomes even more successful, even more loved. Their talent explodes. The system's dependency then deepens. Monetarily, it becomes inescapable. And somewhere in that deepening dependency, the system realizes that it has a problem that it doesn't know what to do with. It doesn't know how to solve it. And it's a huge, big problem. So the system either turns away from it, let everything fall where it may, or they step in. But it cannot contain what it created. It can no longer contain it. And the genius, the talent, the person, the leader the world leader, whatever it is, as the company head is out of control. Attempts at containment arrive too late and feel to the genius's already primed nervous system like betrayal, like the conditional love they always suspected was coming, like confirmation that the system was never really safe to begin with, and that they were right, that they cannot trust anyone but themselves. And what the public would describe as, oh, they're eccentric, they're always alone, or they're always on their own, or they only like to be with certain people. You may label that as eccentric when actually that person is seeking singularity and they want to be left alone to do what they do. And so the dismantling begins. From the outside, it looks like self-destruction. And from the inside, it feels like self-preservation. So from the outside, it looks like, oh my goodness, what's this person? Not again. I'm sick of hearing about them. But on the inside, the person is feeling like, yes, this is how I take care of myself. This is how I get people to leave me alone so I can do whatever I want to do. Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist and a systems theorist whose work on communication and pattern in human systems remains profoundly underutilized in popular psychology. Gregory wrote about the concept of the double bind, which I've mentioned before, the impossible relational situation where every available response leads to loss. The genius in a system that simultaneously needs and fears their power is living inside a double bind. Comply and you lose identity. You're no longer singular. Resist and you lose belonging. There is no clean exit. So in your workplace, you have possibly watched this sequence play out without even knowing or having the language for it. The brilliant new hire, whose unconventional approach was celebrated in the interview and managed out 18 months later. The person just got managed out. Whoever was in charge managed them to death, and they left. The founder, whose vision built the company and whose presence began to threaten it. The creative director, whose instincts were genius, until they stop being convenient. The system rarely examines its own role. You know, it's always easier to pathologize the individual and not the system. So it's the individual's fault. That person is a problem. Well, actually, the system is a problem because you allowed that disruptive, harmful, aggressive abuser to remain within your system for many, many years. So yes, the individual is disturbed, but so is the system because you allowed them to remain. Today, we're not doing that. Everything we've explored today lives in your workplace right now in ways that may not announce themselves as genius or dysfunction or attachment wounds. But it looks like the high performer whose results are extraordinary and whose relationships are not. The team member who delivers brilliantly in isolation, but destabilizes every collective project they touch. The manager whose vision is genuinely exceptional, but whose need for control is quietly dismantling the team built to execute it. No one wants to work within that. And it can be such a relief when that element has been removed. Lead singer syndrome is what I call lead singer syndrome. And I use that term deliberately because it translates with remarkable precision throughout. So it's not exclusive to music, of course. It's the dynamic that emerges when one individual's identity becomes so fused with a collective success that sharing the credit feels like losing yourself. An unskilled manager encountering this dynamic for the first time will almost always make the same mistake. They will manage the behavior. They will address the symptoms. They will have the conversations about collaboration and team values and professional conduct, unless they are as toxic as the perpetrator. If they are, then they will instigate people not getting on. They will ensure that that continues because they may take pleasure in watching people suffer. They will not address the wound because doing that would mean problems can become solvable. Instead, they will live for the threat, control. And the wound, unaddressed, will keep producing the behavior. This is where people have been in workplaces, public office, bands, and the behavior continues. And why? Because the system allows it. I mean, we have seen bands take control of that. There are many stories of people firing band members because they couldn't control their substance abuse or other behavior. The same for public office, and there's loads of examples everywhere. One of my favorite psychoanalysts is William Bion, and I learned of him when I was training to be a group therapist. He's a psychoanalyst, and his work on group dynamics and what he called basic assumption states transformed our understanding of how groups function under stress. And he observed that groups under pressure default to 1 to 3 unconscious modes: dependency, fight or flight, or pairing. So the group organized around a genius is almost always oscillating between dependency and fight or flight. Dependent on the exceptional individual's capabilities, so fighting or fleeing when that dependency becomes untenable will usually happen. So, for example, the drummer who stops coming to rehearsal isn't really being unprofessional. The drummer is in fight or flight. The guitar player who is 3, 5 to 10 hours late for every rehearsal isn't being honorary. They're in fight or flight. The managing director and the copywriter who walk in late together, usually for every meeting, isn't being collaborative. They're pairing. And you, watching from wherever you're watching, you recognize that feeling. You've seen it before. You've felt it before because you have been that drummer. You have managed that lead singer. Or you've sat in that boardroom watching someone dismantle something that didn't need to be dismantled, feeling that particular helplessness of witnessing, without your permission, destruction. And you saw it coming and you couldn't stop it.
Never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button right now. Thank you for your support. You make this podcast possible. Now, back to the show.
So let's talk about you, because this video was always about you. This episode is about you. The frameworks, the research, the examples, they exist to give you language to something that you've already lived. Either you've lived it or you are living it. Christina Maslach's research on compassion fatigue identified, something that feels almost uncomfortable to admit. That sustained exposure to someone else's emotional volatility, even someone we love, even someone we admire, even someone whose genius we've benefited from, they've contributed to the best times of our lives. It has physiological costs. The nervous system that witnesses chronic instability begins to adapt. It numbs, it distances, it stops responding with the same intensity that it once did. And this is why supervision for any supervision, management sessions, all of those things, accountability sessions, all of that's really helpful when you're in the caring profession. But, again, I say that to say this is not a character flaw. If you're feeling exhausted, that you've been made to witness things you haven't asked to witness, this is a nervous system doing exactly what it was meant to do, what it was designed to do, and that's to protect the organism, to conserve resources, protect your energy, withdraw from what is depleting, people draining you without your permission. Now, the guilt that often accompanies this withdrawal, coming away from it all, and I'm not just talking about unfollowing someone on social media, although that may be necessary, because the acting out there is increasing. I suppose the refusal to watch certain TV shows, the sense that we should care more, maybe distancing yourself from that friend who is always, there's a crisis. Every time you see them, there's a crisis. That work colleague, every time you see them, something's wrong. They're ill. The sense that we should care more, feel more, stay more connected is one of the least examined costs of living or working in proximity to exceptional, I want to say volatile people, because it is volatility. And of course, I'm not saying that all exceptional people or all geniuses are volatile or act out. But many of them do. But you don't have to be a genius to do that. In fact, it's very clear that a lot of people who are acting out are far from geniuses. It's a human thing, not a genius thing. Peter Levine, whose somatic experiencing work transformed trauma therapy, understood that the body keeps a record of what the mind tries to rationalize away. This is so helpful. You can intellectually understand why the geniuses behave as they do. You can read every framework in this video that I've mentioned and nod along. And your nervous system will still brace when you hear a certain tone of voice in a meeting, or when you hear a particular celebrity's name come up in the news. You immediately mute. I know I do. And your nervous system will still brace when you hear a certain sound. It may not even be audible, but you'll feel it. You'll sense it. When the energy in the room shifts in a familiar direction, you feel it. You'll still feel that particular exhaustion, and there's no clean explanation. But that exhaustion is information, not an explanation. So it's your nervous system communicating what your conscious mind may still be trying to negotiate. You're allowed to be tired. You are allowed to have run out of a particular kind of patience without it meaning anything about your capacity for compassion. Compassion fatigue is not the absence of compassion. Fatigue and absence are two different things. It's the evidence of how much you actually gave. You're drained because you've given your all. There is nothing left. I want to be careful here about what I am and what I'm not offering. This is not a resolution. So human beings, I don't see human beings as a problem to solve. Human beings, we create scenarios in our lives that need some type of new information. And the dynamics we've explored today do not have clean endings or resolutions. Bands still break up. Companies don't make it. Some never recover. Colleagues move on, carrying wounds that were never addressed. So often the bully goes on to somewhere else and bullies someone else. What I am offering is something I believe is more useful than a resolution. Recognition. Murray Bowen, whose family systems theory gave us one of our most durable tools for understanding how patterns transmit across relationships and across generations. So this was so interesting. And Murray spoke about differentiation. This is the capacity to remain connected to a system while maintaining a very clear sense of where you end and where the system begins, and to care without being consumed by it all, to understand without being responsible for fixing. When you can master something like this, then you can listen without becoming fatigued. So that is the work for the witness, for the colleague, for the bandmate, for anyone who has found themselves inside a system organized around someone else's unhealed wound. It's so obvious at times. But what you may find, especially in these systems, because it's across the board, in the workplace, in the boardroom, in bands, on the stage, in neighborhoods, in politics, name it, it's there because it's a human condition. You will see the wound being acted out. And whoever is in charge, the manager or whoever it may be, will often allow it to carry on and may even contribute because their wound is the same. Not detachment, not indifference, differentiation. Knowing where you end, knowing where others begin. And if you are someone who recognizes yourself, not only in the exhausted witness, but in the exceptional individual whose patterns we've been tracing along today, I want to say this very carefully, very directly to you. The wound is not the genius. It was never the genius. The wound and the genius grew up together, and they learned to speak in the same voice. But they are not the same thing. The dismantling is not inevitable. And understanding that pattern is always the very first step towards interpreting it. It's why I do these episodes. Because, I want to say videos, but I'm also on Spotify and Apple, so it's audio. It's why I do these episodes, because understanding things it really does help. So, does any of this remind you of someone? Perhaps a band you loved, but through the years you've seen them come together, fall apart. Maybe one particular band member of a particular band is up, is down, is in rehab, is out, and now is doing something else. The actor who's all over the place. A workplace that you survived, perhaps. It was so incredibly toxic, but you got out pretty much all in one piece. A dynamic that you're still making sense of. Tell me in the comments, because these conversations, the ones that happen after the episode ends, are where the real understanding begins. And I've created the Toxic Workplace Recovery Kit. The link, it's free, it's in the description, and this will help you evenings, weekends, especially during times when your body should be in downtime, relaxing, recovering from that toxic workplace, restoring your energy, your mind, your nervous system back to a place of serenity and calm and peace, so that you're not just vegging out in front of the telly or even under the covers in bed, for the whole day. You are out living your life so that you feel replenished, refreshed when you go back in on Monday or whenever you do. Evening time's really, really important. It is interactive, so it's a little app that you just download, and it's perfect for on the go. If you want to know more about how these workplaces and situations within systems occur and how they dismantle, watch the next video on screen, and I will see you there.